Nwabueze, determined to uncover the truth, got up from his chair and made a beeline for his father's house. The photograph and the cryptic note had stirred something deep within him, and he knew he had to read that letter attached to the photo. Perhaps it would shed more light on this quagmire and give him a sense of direction, so he will know how to confront the people who had possibly been lying to him all his life. As he headed for the door, his thoughts racing, he almost missed seeing Juliet walking through the hallway, gently rocking Ebube, their son, to sleep after feeding him. She took one look at Nwabueze and instantly sensed something was wrong. Wait, she called out to him, her voice filled with concern. She went into one of the rooms, quickly handed the baby over to her mom, and rushed out again, but didn't see her husband. She searched the entire house, but he was nowhere to be found. Obweze had waited, torn between his need for answers and the worry in his wife's voice. But the urgency of his mission won, and before Juliet would come out, he was already out the door. Juliet quickly ran to his office, hoping he had gone back there to wait for her, but he wasn't. She searched the entire house, but he was nowhere to be found. Confused and worried, she rushed outside, hoping to catch him before he left to wherever that had him looking as though he wants to kill someone. Still, no sign of him. She considered going to his parents' house, but then hesitated, thinking he wouldn't have gone there with such anger. What would they have done to make him look so agitated, she wondered, her mind racing with possibilities. Unable to figure out what was going on, Juliet reluctantly returned to the house, her worry deepening with each passing moment. Something was clearly wrong, but she had no idea what it was or how to help her husband. All she could do was wait and hope that when Nwabueze returned, he would open up to her and let her in on whatever the burden was that was weighing so heavily on his mind. Meanwhile, in the family compound, Nwabueze's heart pounded in his chest as he quickened his pace towards his mother's room. His emotions were a turbulent mix of fear and determination. Fear of confirming the unsettling suspicions gnawing at his mind, and determination because he could no longer live in the shadows of half-truths and lies. The need for answers overrode everything else, including the potential consequences of what he might uncover. As he approached the room, he felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting, threatening to upend everything he had ever known. He entered the room, heading straight for the cupboard where he had found the photograph and later, earlier. To his relief, his mother was still out, and there was no sign of Oge or Ogo either. The absence of his siblings surprised him. Neither of them had come to peep at him or ask what he was doing, as they would have normally done. But he suspected they were avoiding him since that last incident. Perhaps, sensing the tension and unease that now hung over the household, they had kept their distance. It was just as well. If he was going to confront anyone, he needed to have some answers of his own first. Mokbeze pulled out the file and carried it to the bed, where he sat down, his hands trembling slightly. He carefully retrieved the letter from within the file, his breath catching in his throat. As he unfolded the paper, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He had to steel his mind before he could bring himself to read the contents. The handwriting was delicate, a woman's hand, and as his eyes scanned the world around him seemed to blur. The letter read, "To my dear son Michael, if you are reading this, it means you have grown up and I am no longer with you. My name is Eunice Amara, and I am your mother. I loved you from the moment I knew I was carrying you. And even though I am not there to watch you grow, I have never stopped loving you. I know you have been raised by another woman, and I want you to know that it was not by choice that I left you. I was very sick when you were born, and I had no choice but to leave you in the care of the woman who is now your mother. She promised to care for you as her own, and I believe she would. I hope she has treated you well, and that you have grown into the fine man I dreamed you would become. If there is one thing I ask of you, it is to remember that you were loved deeply and truly by the woman who brought you into this world. You are my greatest joy, and I will always love you, my dear Michael, with all my love, your mother, Eunice. Nwabueze's hand shook violently as he finished reading the letter. He felt as though the room was spinning around him, the walls closing in. His breath came in shallow gasps as the truth he had long feared now stared him in the face. Eunice Amara was his real mother, the woman who had raised him, the woman he had known as his mother all his life, had lied to him. She had hidden the truth from him, kept him from knowing who he truly was. And worse, she had harbored a deep-seated resentment towards him, a resentment that now made chilling sense in light of what he had just learned. Nwabueze clutched the letter to his chest, tears streaming down his face, as the weight of the revelation crushed him. His entire life had been built on a lie, and now the foundation of his identity was crumbling beneath him. He had been kept in the dark about his true origins, deprived of the love of the woman who had given him life. But as the tears fell, a new resolve began to take shape within him. He couldn't let this truth destroy him. He had to confront the people who had kept this from him, demand answers, and reclaim his true identity. For the first time in his life, Nwabueze felt a sense of belonging. At least now he knows. He knows that he came from somewhere. He knows that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. He knows who he is, and he knew what he had to do. The confrontation he had long avoided was now inevitable, and he would face it head on. He would no longer live under the weight of lies and deceit. He would seek the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As Nwabueze stepped out of the room, the letter and photograph clutched tightly in his hand, he almost collided with Ifeoma. His first instinct was guilt, a familiar feeling that had plagued him throughout his life. Whenever he crossed an unspoken boundary with her, he had grown up scared and emotionally detached from her, and rarely did he venture into her private space. Now that he has done so without her knowledge or permission, even as an adult, he felt like an intruder. But he quickly caught himself. Why should he feel guilty? Even if she wasn't his biological mother, he had spent his entire life believing she was. So he had a right to seek the truth, and he might as well trash other issues he had kept pending. Nwabueze stood still, waiting for Ifeoma to begin her usual dramatic tirade. But something was different this time. Instead of the anger he expected, there was a look of fear, or was that anxiety, on her face. For a moment he was confused until it dawned on him what might be the cause of her unusual reaction. She must have seen the letter and photograph in his hand. Without hesitation, he spoke, his voice steady. Please, can you come to the sitting room? I want to talk to you and Papa. I need answers. Ifeoma visibly recoiled, but before she could muster a response, Nwabueze had already turned and left. He didn't wait for her reaction. He had waited long enough for the truth, and now he was going to get it, whether they were ready or not. Ifeoma stood rooted to the spot for a moment, her mind racing. She knew exactly what Nwabueze wanted to discuss. The letter and photograph he held were the key to a secret she had hoped would never resurface. Her heart pounded as she realized the day she had dreaded for so long had finally arrived. How was she going to explain everything? How was she going to face the truth she had kept hidden for years? As she stood there, lost in thought, Uchenna and Oge came up to her, their faces filled with curiosity and concern. They had sensed the tension in the house and wanted to know what was going on. What happened, Mama? Uchenna asked. Is everything okay? Oge added, her voice tinged with worry. Ifama waved them off, trying to maintain her composure. Wait here. I will explain later, she said, her voice shaky. When Ifama entered the sitting room, Uchenna and Oge tiptoed quietly behind her, stopping just outside the door. They leaned in close, pressing their ears against the wall, eager to hear what the fuss was all about. The tension in the air was thick. They knew whatever was about to be discussed or reviewed would be big. When Ifeoma finally sat down, Chukwudi sensed that something was terribly wrong. He looked at his son's tense expression and then at his wife, whose eyes were cast downward, avoiding his gaze. He could feel the tension in the room, but he waited patiently for Nwabueze to speak. Nwabueze wasted no time. He had come for answers, and he wasn't going to leave without them. Papa, I have some questions that I need answers to. Okay, my son, Chukwudi responded, glancing at Ifeoma again. She remained silent, her gaze still fixed on the floor. What questions are those? He asked, turning his attention back to Nwabueze. You remember that I asked you earlier about my birth certificate and how I needed it for clarifications? Nwabueze began, his voice steady but laced with underlying tension. Yes, I thought you found it, Chukwudi replied, still unsure of where this was going. I did, Nwabueze confirmed, but I found something else while I was looking for it. Chukwudi frowned in concern. What did you find, my son? Without saying anything further, Nwabueze placed the photograph and the letter on the table in front of his father. Chukwudi reached for his reading glasses, his eyes trembling slightly as he picked up the items to inspect them more closely. The moment he put on his glasses and focused on the photograph, a shout of shock escaped his lips. His hands shook, causing the photograph and the letter to slip from his grasp and fall back onto the table. He looked up at Ifeoma, his eyes wide with disbelief and hurt, searching for an explanation. Ifeoma, still avoiding his gaze, remained silent. The weight of the truth hung heavily in the room. Chukwudi's mind raced. He looked at Ifeoma accusingly, trying to understand why she kept the picture and later why denying it all these years. He remembered the conversation they had years ago when Ifeoma had told him she had burned the photograph and the letter. He had been very angry with her. But then she promised him that Nwabueze will never feel the need to look for another mother while she was alive. And Chukwudi, wanting to protect his son and keep his family intact, had reluctantly agreed. He had made peace with that, believing her completely. And they had both agreed that Nwabueze need not know anything since the picture and later we are gone. But now, seeing this very item she claimed to have destroyed, he realized the depth of her deception. Anger and betrayal surged through him. But at this point, he had gotten too old to create a scene with his wife over such matters. What he must do now is try and douse the fire her stupidity and wickedness has ignited. The chicken has come home to roost, and he must tread carefully. Besides, escalating the situation would only drive his son further away, and that was something he could not afford, or else he may not be able to recover him again. Chukwudi took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm within him. He looked at Nwabueze, who was waiting for an explanation, his face a mixture of pain and resolve. Chukwudi knew he had to choose his words carefully. My son, he began, his voice heavy with emotion. There is a lot you don't know, and perhaps things we should have told you a long time ago. But please, understand that it was not kept from you with a malicious intent. It was done with your best interest in mind. Nwabueze's eyes narrowed, doubt etched into his features. Is that so, Papa? Then why is the story of my life a lot different than the narration you are giving now? Chukwudi sighed deeply. You deserve the truth. You always have. and I promise you, you will get it now. He paused, looking at Ifoma again, who finally met his gaze. But know that this truth may be painful for all of us. Nwabueze's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for his father to continue. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back. Nwabueze sat in stunned silence as his father spoke, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him like a suffocating blanket. Chukwudi's voice was heavy with regret and sorrow as he recounted the story of a love lost, a life cut short, and the lies that had woven themselves into the fabrics of their family. You see, my son, Chukwudi had begun, his eyes misting over with memories. Your mother, Eunice, is the love of my life. But I was also the only son, and I wanted to make my own mother happy. When she vehemently opposed my intention to marry your mother, I eventually gave in to her wishes and married Ifoma, who was her choice. He paused, as if reliving the moments of the past. But because I loved your mother so much, I couldn't let her go. I knew she loved me too, but to my surprise and chagrin, she refused to have anything to do with me after my marriage. And that broke my heart in ways I couldn't explain. I took it for granted initially that because she loved me too much, that it would be too difficult for her to leave, for her to walk away and turn her back on me when I chose another. But no matter the reason behind that decision, your mother refused to give in to my pleas, and it has been my biggest regret. Nwabueze watched his father struggle with his emotions. The man he had always known as strong and unwavering was now vulnerable, his voice trembling with the weight of his confession. I married a former for my mother, and for that reason, I left her with my mother, Chukwudi continued, his voice thick with regret. I went back to Aba where I was based almost immediately after we got married, still trying to win your mother Eunice over, only coming back home to see my mother and Ifoma occasionally. And this went on for 3 years, until your mother got sick. Chukwudi's eyes grew distant as he recalled the events of the past. I heard the news from a mutual friend of ours, and I went straight to see her. She was in a bad state, with nobody available that day to take her to the hospital. The mutual friend who had told me about her sickness was traveling for a family function, and that was the reason she decided to inform me, so that Eunice could have someone to look after her while she was away. I took Eunice to the hospital immediately and stayed with her until she got better. What about her own people? What of her family? Nwabueze interrupted, his voice strained with emotions. Why was she alone? You see, your mother was an orphan, without any siblings, and her father's brothers maltreated her so bad that she ran away. And she doesn't know her mother's relatives. This is because her own mother was from another tribe, and being that her choice of a husband was not approved by her family, they turned their backs on her when she insisted. When she died, Eunice was just a little girl of 7 years, so she didn't know how to go about looking for her mother's people. She decided to stay with the ones she knew, but they treated her so bad and rejected her, so she ended up alone. Nwabueze felt his heart break for the woman he had never known, who had obviously endured so much pain and hardship. When she recovered fully, we bonded again, Chukwudi continued. And that was how she got pregnant with you. She was devastated, but I was happy because Ifoma had never been able to get pregnant since I got married to her. And my mother was already making life miserable for the both of us with her demands for a grandson. Chukwudi's voice softened, tinged with sorrow. When I told her of your mother's pregnancy, my mother was elated and insisted I must marry your mother and bring her and the child home. But Eunice refused. She stood her ground no matter how much I and my mother begged her. Nwabueze listened, his mind reeling. He could hardly believe what he was hearing, yet everything suddenly made sense. The tension in the household, the way Ifoma had treated him. My mother even came all the way from the village to apologize to your mother for standing against our union in the first place, Chukwudi continued. But Eunice was firm. She said she would not break another woman's home, that what happened between us had been a mistake, and she regretted it deeply. But she also said that she would not prevent the child from coming home to his father's people when he is grown enough. Chukwudi's voice broke at this point, but unfortunately, she developed complications during your delivery and died just a week after. Ifoma had agreed to take care of you as her own since she couldn't have children. Nobody outside my mother, Ifoma, and I knows of your true origin. Everyone thought you were either adopted or you were even our biological child. The room was silent as Nwabueze absorbed the truth of his father's words. The pain of betrayal, the sorrow of a mother lost, and the realization of a life built on lies weighed heavily on his heart. He looked at the photograph on the table again, the image of a woman he had never known, but who had given him life. Papa, Nwabueze finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Why didn't you tell me? Chukwudi's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his son. I thought I was trying to protect you, my son. I thought that by keeping the truth from you, I was sparing you. But now I see that I was wrong. I see that I was only protecting my failed errors, that I was only trying to cover my mistakes. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. Nwabueze's heart ached as he looked at the man who had raised him, the man who had given him life, but also the man who had hidden such a monumental truth from him. He didn't know whether to feel anger, sorrow, or something in between. All he knew was that his life had changed forever and nothing would ever be the same again. I need time, Nwabueze said quietly. I need time to process all of this. Chukwudi nodded, tears streaming down his face. Take all the time you need, my son. Just know that I love you. I have always loved you and I always will. Praise. I felt guilty towards Ifoma. That is why I overlooked most of her mistreatment of you. Forgetting that you shouldn't pay for my own mistakes. You were an innocent child whose teeth was set on edge because I, your father, ate sour grapes. I know I have failed you as a father. I didn't want you to grow up with a weak mind like I did. After the ordeal with your mother, I felt like a failure for listening and always giving in to my mother's every wish. So I tried to raise you to be what I considered a man, to be better than me. But in imprinting my mistakes on you, I made it worse. Please forgive your foolish father and show mercy to the woman who helped raise you. Please, my son. Chukwudi concluded with his head bent. Nwabueze sighed, his heart breaking at the story of his mother. Now that he has heard about her, he wished more than anything that he had been given an opportunity to know her. She sounded like a woman with integrity and strength. Even though he doesn't know her, he was happy to have come from such a person. He was relieved, in fact. But before he could gather his thoughts, they heard a loud thud on the floor, and looking up, he saw Ifeoma lying unconscious. Their father's shout must have alerted Uchenna and Oge, who stood rooted with shock at what they had heard at their eavesdropping positions. They ran into the sitting room and met their mother on the floor, rushing towards her as Nwabueze tried to lift her up from the ground. Uchenna quickly joined him and together they carried her into the car. Ogo, who had gone to get something from the market, was just stepping into the compound and seeing everyone in a state of panic, rushed towards them, and on sighting her mother unconscious inside the car, began to wail, fearing the worst. She grabbed onto Nwabueze, who was rushing to the driver's side to drive them to the hospital, and began to accuse him. What have you done to her, you wicked man? Have you finally succeeded in doing what has always been in your mind? She cried, hitting him repeatedly. Nwabueze tried to pry her hands from his shirt gently so that they would drive out as soon as possible, but Ogo held on tightly, dragging him all over the place in her anger. Oge rushed over, tried to talk to her to calm down, that they will explain everything later, but Ogo seemed to be on a vendetta. This was an opportunity she has been looking for, and nobody was going to take it from her. Not minding that she was delaying the help her mother would have been getting if they get to the hospital on time. But before she could drag on the matter, she felt something hit her face like a thunderbolt, and she found herself staggering and unable to stand. She fell to the ground, clutching her face in dazed shock. Her head felt like it had been hit by a hammer. Your stupidity knows no bounds, Uchenna thundered as he went back into the car and begged Nwabueze to please drive so that they can get to the hospital as quickly as possible. Ogo lay on the floor, unable to decipher what just happened. Was it Uchenna that just slapped her like that? Or was she dreaming? But nobody paid any attention to her again. Oge was just crying, saying they should move already, her heart in her hands. Their father sat at the back seat, placing Ifoma's head on his laps, hoping that she would be saved from this. He wanted her to be happy, even though she made mistakes with Nwabueze. Her bitterness was as a result of his own inability to make up his mind and stand as the man he was supposed to be for all of them. If he had stood his ground and married who he wanted, perhaps Ifeoma would have married someone else who would have made her happy, and she wouldn't have needed to suffer what she had to suffer in his hands. Uchenna, sitting beside Nwabueze, couldn't look at him out of shame. His mind was reeling from all he had earlier. He still doesn't know who to pity the most. Was it his mother for being the unwanted bride? Or was it Nwabueze for being the son of the desired woman who suffered as a result of his mother's bitter and unforgiving heart? But one thing was clear in all this. Nwabueze really was at the receiving end of it all. He was the only one who was not given a choice in the whole matter, yet he was the one who made the best decision. He couldn't imagine himself growing up in the kind of toxic environment that Nwabueze had to face. If he had been him in Nwabueze's shoes, he would not have turned out as kind-hearted as Nwabueze did. He would have made sure that everyone who made him suffer paid a heavy price for it. But here was Nwabueze, giving his best to the very people who were responsible for all his anguish, him and his sisters not exempted. From this kind-hearted man, he had learned a valuable lesson. Everyone has a choice. How you react to circumstances and people is entirely your choice. If you make a wrong choice like his parents did with Nwabueze, you may or may not get another chance for redemption. But nobody is responsible for the choices that you make. Because you can always choose to do better than those who hurt you, like Nwabueze has displayed with his life. He, Uchenna, had enjoyed his mother's love and attention without questioning why his elder brother was treated so differently. Perhaps he was afraid of losing his mother's approval. Or was he simply a coward like his father, who couldn't make a decision on his own? He knew his mother's treatment of Nwabueze was unfair, but he just couldn't react against it as he should have. And that was a choice he made. He made a choice like everyone else in this scenario, and his was not the best. He took the easy way out by making a selfish choice like his parents did, and he is so ashamed of himself right now. But from here on out, he will strive to be the better person just like his elder brother and his wife Juliet had shown them with their lives. Each occupant of the vehicle rushing towards the hospital was occupied in their own world until they got to the hospital and Ifeoma was promptly attended to by a doctor. Luckily, it was a mild heart attack and she was resuscitated, and after all the tests, the doctor concluded that she didn't need any surgery. But because she was still so weak, she would have to be admitted and monitored until she was completely out of the woods. When the doctor left, Nwabueze stepped out of the room to call his wife and felt very bad after seeing several missed calls from her number. He called her back immediately and apologized when he heard the panic in her voice. I am so sorry, love. Please calm down. I am alright. I will explain better when I get back. But Juliet wasn't having it at all. How can you leave the house in that state and still ignore my calls? Worse, I went to the family house when I couldn't bear it anymore. I met those two mad witches you call sisters there. Hold on, Nwabueze said, immediately at attention. Did they do anything to you? His voice growing very quiet. Juliet instantly sensed that if she should say what really happened, her husband may do what everyone will regret later. So she decided to downplay it at least till he gets home, because she knew Nwabueze will not take it easy with his sisters if he hears that they tried to beat her. With all that had happened, she had tried her best to avoid them, so that her husband will not be triggered. She has been calming him down since she left the hospital after the fainting incident. But she knows it is only a matter of time before they will do another thing that would cause him to unleash on them his true state of heart, unknown to them, of how much he has been holding back. Knowing all this, Juliet just said, they refused to talk to her, so she went back to the house. Nobody felt his anger douse after hearing Juliet's explanation. They were lucky. They were lucky that they didn't bring out their foolishness today on his wife as well. If not, they would have understood that he who plays with the drum of spirits must also learn to dance to their beats. He had been taking all that they dished out on him because he considered them blood. But the line has been drawn where his family is concerned. Anyone that wants to be mad should keep it far from his wife and his children. He went back into the room and saw that Ifeoma was awake. He was relieved because no matter what, she was still the only mother he knows, even though their history was horrible. Starvation and beating is minor punishment to the psychological warfare she unleashed on him while growing up. He grew up hearing her call him useless and good for nothing, always telling him at any given opportunity, warranted or not, that he would never amount to anything in life. But in spite of all this, he still wished her well. It wasn't his call to decide on the life or the death of a person. He believes strongly, and his life has proven that to him, that there is God who judges all things, hidden and open, and that God will never leave the guilty to go unpunished. So he usually do the best he can for anyone and leave the punishment for God. He's a blessed man, and he, right now, should not allow for any seed of darkness into his life. When he had the opportunity to latch onto bitterness, he didn't. So he had outgrown all of that. He sat down, waiting, as his father and Uchenna had begged him to stay behind while they rushed home and get her things. So he sat there, lost in thought, when he felt a hand on his knee. Where's my child? Ifeoma called to him weakly. He looked at her face, feeling pity for her in spite of himself. She was really to be pitied, he realized suddenly, because how can a person carry such weight of unforgiveness and bitterness in her heart for so many years? He couldn't imagine going through that. He looked at her and said quietly, do you have something to say? I am listening. Ifeoma nodded and said weakly, could you call me mother, even if it's for the last time? How was a pause, caught off guard. Of all the things he expected her to say, that was not even in the contest. He cleared his throat. He cleared his throat and said, calling you mother is not a problem, because no matter the circumstances and whatever your reasons were, you still nursed the child your husband had with another woman a woman he loved more than you, and you watched him grow with your tending and attention. And for that, I will always be grateful. He saw tears fall from the sides of her eyes as he spoke. In spite of all I did and said to you, Ifeoma said. Nwabueze nodded, but stopped speaking. Bueze, she said, you have grown up into a person with such beautiful heart. Her voice choked with emotion. If only she could take back the hands of time, could she have done better? She wondered, feeling shame and regret beat at her. I am sorry for all I did to you, my child. You were supposed to be God's consolation, His gift to me. But instead, I saw you as a punishment. You see, I knew your father was in love with your mother, but I convinced my mother to ensure that I married your father. Because I loved him, I have always been in love with him, but he never had eyes for anyone. I thought that once I successfully get married to him, he would forget about his love in the city. But I saw that it was not going to be so. Why he always run back to the city in pursuance of your mother. I became bitter and desperate when I couldn't bear a child and started taking all manner of herbs and medications, which blocked my fallopian tube. But I refused to tell his mother because I was scared they would use that as an opportunity to cast me away. By some miracle, my fallopian tubes opened when I took you in and started taking care of you. But I was still too bitter to see that your presence was bringing me healing and blessings. I took in for about 6 months after you came into our lives, and that was how you opened the way for me to have children of my own. But I still treated you as though you were a part of those that hurt me. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. Give me the last chance, like you have been doing all these years. Give me the chance to love you like a mother should love her son. I want to take back all the evil I have spoken over you. Please, Breze, forgive this bitter and foolish woman, I beg of you. But she couldn't go on because her emotions took over and she was still very weak. Breze told her not to worry because her words were causeless. Therefore, the curses never rested on him because his life is a blessed life. And he had testimonies and proofs all over to show that her evil words never stood against him. He told her to try and sleep so that she will not escalate her ill health because he will be here when she wakes up. She nodded obediently, surprised at his forgiveness. Looking up at him, she drifted off almost immediately. Uchenna later came back with Ogo and Ogi, and seeing that she was still deeply asleep, Nwabueze decided to go home and talk to his wife. Ogo, who must have been briefed on the latest developments, couldn't look Nwabueze in the eye when they entered. Nwabueze looked at both of them. I wanted to ask why they were looking like a train ran over them, but decided at the last minute to mind his business. He simply nodded to their greetings and headed out. Getting to his house, Juliet rushed over and hugged him tightly. I was so scared when I couldn't reach you. With the way you left the house, I feared for the worst. I am sorry. I am so sorry I frightened you. Nwabueze said, hugging her back while stroking her back. My son, you are welcome. Thank God you are okay. Oh. Your wife was nearly running mad here, even though I told her severally to calm down, Juliet's mother said, coming out of her room carrying the baby. Juliet disengaged from Nwabueze's arms as he chuckled at what her mother said. You think you have the right to laugh right now? Her relief at seeing her husband safe replaced by anger. After scaring me half to death, you are laughing? Nwabueze, for a weird reason, couldn't stop smiling, even though he knows it was making his wife very angry. He tried to bring her back into his embrace, but she refused and angrily went into their room. Nwabueze went to his mother-in-law and kissed his son, who was, in his own word, the baby smiled as if he recognized who just touched him. That singular act brought tears to Nwabueze's eyes. These ones are his, and he will protect them with his life. He excused himself and went in search of his wife. He needed to pacify her more than anything right now. But before he stepped out of the sitting room, he heard his mother-in-law say, "Whatever you people are going to do in that room, please remember that this child is only 3 months old." Nwabueze looked back at her with shock and embarrassment. She just did as if she didn't say anything and went to sit down playing nonchalantly with her grandson. Nwabueze laughed quietly and left her alone. Getting to their room, he grabbed Juliet as she tried to leave the room at his entrance. "Please now," he said softly. "How can I make you feel better if you don't hear me out?" Juliet stopped struggling and said, "When you finish laughing at me, maybe then I will hear what you want to say." That nearly prompted another laughter from Wabuze, but he knows that the aftermath will not be worth it. So he squeezed his mouth and formed a serious face. "Baby, I will never laugh at you, you know that," he said. "I was just happy at the prospect of someone being so worried about me." "What kind of nonsense defense is that? So I don't worry about you before, eh?" Juliet asked. Her anger subsided, but still unwilling to give in to her husband's charm. Not yet. And she was also trying to distract him from seeing the finger marks on her face that she got from being slapped by Ogo. Robert was oblivious to that for now. He lifted her from the floor, and Juliet shrieked in surprise, holding on for dear life as he carried her and twirled around. In a moment, she forgot why she was even angry a few minutes ago. Nwabueze carried her to the bed and laid her down gently, laughing as he remembered what Mama had said earlier. "Why are you laughing now?" Juliet asked, narrowing her eyes in suspicion. He told her what her mother had said, and she busted out laughing. "Should we prove her right?" Nwabueze asked, lying down beside her. Juliet made to scrabble up, but Nwabueze pinned her down. "Where do you think you are going to, woman?" he asked, all serious. "It is not me you will send back to the delivery room anytime soon," Juliet said, trying to get away from him. Nwabueze couldn't keep the serious face for long. He laid his head on her tummy and busted out in laughter, his heart brimming with joy and gratitude. He felt so grateful that he had Juliet to come home to. She was like a fresh spring of water to his desert years of childhood and adolescence, and he would never take it for granted, this gift that he had been given. They had remained in that position, comfortable in their own silence and each other's arms. As Juliet stroked his back, Nwabueze, exhausted both emotionally and physically, drifted off to sleep. Juliet, realizing he had slept, moved his head to a pillow, and sitting up, she watched him sleep. He always looked so troubled while he slept, but not today. He looked now like a man without a single care in the world. She touched his forehead where a permanent crease had formed as a result of the constant frown, even in her sleep. Whatever had taken him out of the house in such a hurry that morning must have a hand in the state of his mind now, but she will wait until he was ready to tell her what it was. She was glad, though, he slept off. She hoped that the almost invisible finger marks would completely disappear by the time he wakes up, because she has no intention of telling him what had transpired this afternoon, at least not now that he seemed so at peace. Nwabueze was very fond of scrutinizing her face, which is why she can't keep things from him, unless he wasn't around while it happened. He must have been quite distracted not to have noticed the marks when he came back, and she was glad. He doesn't want him having any more problems with his family on her account. Yes, she knows they are quite troublesome, but she has settled their doubts and calmed their madness this afternoon. After she spoke with her husband earlier, and her mind was calm that he was okay, she had gone back to her in-laws' place with 2 canes. Getting there, she had fetched a bucket of water and poured on Ogi and Ogo, who were seated outside looking troubled, taking the advantage of surprise. Juliet had immediately after pouring them water started flogging them. When they had tried to take the canes away from her, she had tackled the both of them to the ground and sat on them. They were shocked at her strength. They were not told that she was trained in self-defense while serving because of the dangerous community she was posted to. She had only been keeping quiet all these years because she doesn't want to be the reason her husband was separated from his family. But now, even after she had left the house for them, they had the guts to slap her just because she came to check if her husband was there. The anger of putting her and her child at risk a year ago resurfaced, and she used it to deal with them. When they had stopped shouting and threatening, she stopped hitting them and sat up from their body. The pain didn't allow them to stand up, so they laid there crying weakly, their voices hoarse. The next time you try this rubbish with me or my husband, I will make sure you spend at least 6 months at the orthopedic wing of a hospital. Juliet warned them, shaking from all the unresolved anger. You people think I have kept quiet all these years because I was weak and stupid? You think silence equals foolishness? I know why I swallowed all the insult and mistreatment from you two especially, but never think for a second it was because I didn't know what to do. As for you, Oge, I trusted you like a sister and I was always telling you my pain, begging you to help me talk to Mama. But I didn't realize that you were the viper hidden in the mud. But that era has ended. Anytime any of you mess up around me, I will teach you a lesson you will never forget. Is that clear? She asked. They both nodded, scared of provoking her further. Juliet hissed, dropping the cane and marched out, leaving them groaning in pain. She was sure painkillers alone would not be able to help them out this time. She smiled in satisfaction as she went back home. When she got home, she had her bath and went to feed her son, who was already crying. So lying down beside him now, she felt at peace with her world and prayed silently that her husband would someday find his own peace. And as she was thinking, she drifted off to sleep. Later that evening, Nwabueze told his wife Juliet everything, and to say she was shocked was an understatement. She then understood why he looked so peaceful while sleeping that afternoon. Her heart leaped for joy for her husband. Now he can relax and live his life, finding closure to the dilemma that plagued him all his life. He had carried the burden that he must earn his mother's love, that he must have done something, or perhaps he wasn't enough. Therefore, he must earn his mother's love and approval. And even at some unconscious level, this desire had robbed him of life's simple joys because he grew up not knowing what would trigger her. So he had unconsciously stayed away from anything that would make him happy. He had been trying for her sake since they got married, but she knows that the damage was still there. But she didn't know how to help him, which was why she had endured those 3 years of torture from them, so she won't add to his burden. Now he knows he wasn't at fault. It wasn't anything he did or didn't do that made her hate him with such bitterness. Now he can stop trying. He can stop living for her. He can now try to discover himself and live for his own happiness. She hugged him tight and promised him to be there all the step of the way. Nwabueze had held his wife that night as she slept at peace with himself and his word, had given him a certain freedom, therefore giving him a change of heart about Ifoma. He will not completely cut her off like he intended initially, but he will nevertheless keep his distance, even though he now understands where her bitterness towards him was coming from. But it still speaks volume of what kind of heart she has to have subjected an innocent child to what she made him go through while growing up. So he will work on forgiving all the parties involved, since forgiveness has been genuinely sought. He may have been the other woman's child, but he was still an innocent who was made to pay the price for the adult's errors, and he will ensure that his own children are not imprinted upon by the errors of the past. Nwabueze relocated his family to Abuja. He wanted them as far away as possible. He didn't want to take them out of the country because he wanted them to experience the Nigerian culture and way of life firsthand. When they are adults and wants to go anywhere, it will be their own decision. But they do come home every Christmas. Nwabueze shuttles between Onitsha and Abuja. He had a very trustworthy manager, so he takes a flight down to Onitsha every other weekend for accounts, and he personally oversees the purchase of goods and services. Nwabueze had learned that choices made by individuals can impact those around them, intended or not. And in order not to cause an innocent child unnecessary grief, we must learn to channel out anger towards the right source and deal with it as early as possible so that there will be no residue to breed bitterness. This lesson Ifeoma also learned, but it was already too late to change the past. So she made up her mind to love and cherish Nwabueze and his children for the rest of her days. So whenever they come home for Christmas, she goes out of her way to spoil them rotten, making their annual trips to the village a fun fair for the children. To them, Grandma was the best. Nwabueze did not try to change this narrative. He was glad that his children get to enjoy what he never did. Nwabueze and Juliet lived happily, and their children grew up to become important, successful, and honorable people. The end. Hi. So this is the end of the story. I hope you've gotten something out of it. I hope it was worth your watch. As you have watched, please tune in to other stories. God bless you. Bye.